It is my pleasure to chat with you today. We have spoken on many occasions, and I believe that you have such wonderful insights into the way college and traditional educational institutions are run behind the scenes, that I feel like you have a lot of insight to share with others who are considering this traditional college path. So before we get too much into the nitty-gritty details, I want to give a little bit of background about you. So this is Lauren, and she is an administrator at Le Fashion Lab. So if you ever apply to Le Fashion Lab, chances are you have been in contact with Lauren. She holds a bachelor's degree in German, lived in Vienna, Austria for a while, and she has about 15 years of experience as an education administrator, primarily in the role of financial aid and coordinator. So after seeing the challenges students face with the financial aid process, Lauren started her own company, which is called Financial Aid Consulting Limited. And her goal is to help students and their families maximize their financial aid that they receive and reduce the stress of the application process. So we'll share more information about Lauren's business later on, but it was this deep-seated passion of Lauren's that led her to Le Fashion Lab, because after finding out about Le Fashion Lab's genuine interest in creating an alternative method for students to study what they're passionate about, for those who are passionate about fashion design, Lauren found that there are some synergies between her business and her values and our business and our values as well. Just wanting to make sure that everybody is treated well, treated fairly, and gets the most cost-effective way of pursuing whatever it is that they're passionate about pursuing and learning more about. Does that sound about right, Lauren?
Yes, definitely.
Got it. Okay. So, you know, we've chatted a lot about this, and one of my first encounters with you was talking about this this topic of what happens behind the scenes in colleges. So I'm looking forward to getting you to share this with anybody who is listening to us today. So before we get more into it, just tell us a little bit more about your background in education, administration, and financial aid. Like, what were some of your roles and responsibilities?
Okay, I started in 2006 at a small four-year private college. I started out at the time just as a temporary position because what do you do with a German major in America? But I quickly went on to become their financial aid counselor and then actually their interim director after some turnover in the office. So within 6 months, I was basically, beginning to direct my own office, which was challenging because there's a lot to learn before you can do that. And then I've worked at 3 other colleges, so they vary between, small private schools, large state schools. The smallest was 1,200 students and the largest was 60,000. And I have also worked for one of the art schools. So basically after 14 years within the schools, I finally just kept seeing the same things over and over. And my roles were varying from, assistant director, program coordinator for federal grants, which meant I did all the, grant disbursement and everything. I processed appeals, was on appeals committees, just all different kinds of roles within the financial aid office. But like I said, there were kind of some of the same challenges at each place where, after a while, I thought somebody kind of needs to be on the outside helping people before they get into that college financial aid office.
Got it. Okay. And what were some of these things that you kept seeing over and over?
There were so many. So there were some, small things and then some very large things. Some of the smaller things were almost everybody at every school would arrive and not really know what they should have been doing up to that point, or know what they need to be going forward, or what their options are. So it became clear that at the high school level, generally the high school guidance counselors are supposed to be letting people know about the financial aid process. However, as much as they may want to be able to do that, they also have a really wide variety of duties and receive so little training that it's really not possible to be able to actually articulate the information in a way that's going to be most helpful for the students. And especially with all their varying duties, that's just not number one on the list. So then once the students got to college, it was basically, if you had, a good counselor who cared to spend that extra time with you, then you might be able to get, all the options, be able to, appeal if you needed to, things like that. But at some schools, they would limit you to 3 minutes per person. And even if they needed 10 minutes of information, you're cut off. So it would cause the same people to not only not get what they needed, but also to keep coming back angrier and angrier, which is really not what you want, because it's always good to help the person as much as you can the first time. So there were a lot of things like that where people just didn't understand the process. And if they didn't walk into the right counselor's office, they might not even know what their options are.
Okay.
And then there were the larger, more egregious kind of systemic political issues, such as changing the requirements that students needed to retain their aid on very short notice, so that, students, maybe they needed to have a 2.0 at the end of the semester, but then all of a sudden in November, they've said, oh, by December, you need to have, well, they've changed it to a 2.0 from, say, a 1.8. So mathematically, it was impossible for the students to pull themselves up to the standard within that time frame, which was actually not legal, but nobody was fighting it until I kind of stood up and said something. And it's one of those things where, the office can set policies, and if nobody knows to stand up against it, or nobody feels safe standing up against it, then a lot of times it flies. Same thing with, one school, they mentioned, I heard actually a dean mention something about just getting warm body. So there was really like a lack of care for the actual person, the student as a person themselves. There was one school that just said, we know these people are not really admissible, but we need the numbers and the money, so we'll just admit them, and we know they won't make it, but we'll get their money from collections eventually. To which I said, that's just super unethical and really illegal too, to admit people that aren't admissible. So they're just
blatant disregard for the students. You said
right.
Admitting students who they know will not be able to complete the program successfully, but they don't care as long as they get their money. And
right.
If the student is unable to pay, they knew that collections would go after that student anyway. So that there is just this blatant disregard for ruining your financial future. So you might go into this program really passionate and excited about studying whatever it is that you want to study, but then years down the line, possibly your whole future is ruined because of a mistake or an inability to keep up. And then if you look at it bigger picture, you can't afford to make these payments. So your credit gets messed up. You can't afford a home. You can't get a car note, all of these things, right?
You also can't transfer to another school, because if you don't have your bill paid off, you can't get a transcript. So these students don't even have an option to go to another school and restart until they've got the collections cleared up. And it's really a big part of the student loan debt crisis right now is, all these schools have been either giving out degrees or pulling students in with the intent of them getting a degree. And then once the school has those numbers, especially after they've retained them the first year, then they don't really care as much on their statistics. So yeah, they'll let some stuff slide. And then it really is the student that ends up, like you said, not able to get a car, a house. Their loans will just keep growing and growing with all this interest. And that's another thing, as financial aid, coming into it as a career, obviously in my mind, it was, we're going to help people financially. That's the goal. But it was pretty quick that I realized that once admissions talks to the people and tries to get them in, they're telling them, you need to do whatever to come here. And so I can't tell you the number of people I had then walk into my office and say, well, I'm taking out a $50,000 private loan with a 20% interest rate, knowing that, first of all, they probably won't even qualify for that in subsequent years. So you've got your first year covered, but then you don't have any plan going forward. And it just always seemed like the school, rather than saying you just need to do whatever to push to make this work, should be trying to help find options. And in my case, I had to talk some people out of those bad decisions. And that didn't sit well with the school because admission is one of those numbers. But to me, it's not ethical to be sitting here in front of somebody and knowing that they're making a bad decision, from a perspective of more knowledge, because you also have to think a large percentage of these students are 18 years old. They've never had a loan. They might not even had a credit card. It seems like free money to them when these loans are offered and when they're kind of put in that context by the admissions office. So it's really important to give them some financial literacy education. Just you can't just strap a student with this much debt without explaining the consequences. And so there are calculators out there on how much they'll owe, things like that, but nobody's pointing them in that direction because they kind of thrive off of a lack of transparency for the most part.
Right. Oh my gosh, there's so much that we could get into there. But you said like a blatant lack of financial literacy and the school not caring about giving you that literacy because it would work to their disadvantage anyway. So you mentioned like students taking out $50,000 for that first year, 20% interest rate, no plan of how to finance the other years. So even if they do drop out after that first year because they can't pay the subsequent years, then they're still left with trying to figure out how to pay that back. And you said that they can't transfer to another school until that's paid back.
Right, if they have an outstanding bill at the college.
Right.
The loans would follow them to another school. So if they got their actual balance paid, they could technically go to another school. However, there are also issues where students have to withdraw mid-semester. And in that case, the school has to return some of the funds that have dispersed. So lots of times if somebody leaves, they end up with a balance and then they can't apply for aid to cover that balance because you have to be actively enrolled to qualify for the aid in the first place. So it's very, very difficult to get any kind of loan after the fact to cover a previous semester to ever get back on track.
Right. And when people are taking out these financial aid loans for school, we're talking about like maybe 20, 30 years of debt, right?
Probably. It depends on which repayment plan you take on. But that's another thing that needs to be kind of outlined better for students, because you have a standard 10-year repayment, but then students also have the option to extend that to 20 years, which makes much lower payments. So it seems, but then the interest is accruing so much that a lot of people actually owe more than what they initially borrowed by the time it gets to that point.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's income-based repayment, which allows you to do it with your income. So you can possibly pay anything from zero up to much less than the normal payment. But again, nobody's educating people about these options. And that's what happened with this public service loan forgiveness program recently. They had to open it up because nobody was telling these students, you have to be on a certain repayment plan for a certain amount of time. So even though they have these benefits to forgive the loans, both the federal government and the schools have not done a good job of rolling out what's needed to be done to actually qualify. So a lot of people who've done 10 years of public service didn't get any loan forgiven like they should have. So it's a big problem across the board, really.
Yeah, it's deceptive, and yeah, it's more than a big problem at this point. And you mentioned like somebody high in authority at a college you worked at used to refer to incoming students as warm bodies, you said?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So no personalization, no empathy, no care. Just get some people in the seats as long as they can pay.
Especially not behind the scenes with a lot of people. That particular person was very bubbly and energetic and very enthusiastic towards the students and parents. But then when you're sitting in a meeting with them, where people are appealing for funds, you can kind of tell how somebody really feels. And so it was very disconcerting when we're looking people in the face and saying, you matter, you're important, we want you as a student. And then in the background, we're saying something very different. And so it was just a very uncomfortable thing to hear somebody referred to like that.
Yeah, totally two-faced, if you ask me.
Yes.
So what really inspired you to join on with Le Fashion Lab?
Well, a few things. I kind of came across it through a friend who was an assistant. And when she mentioned that it was something to do with schools, I had already started my business. And so in my mind, I was thinking I may not go back to a school at some point. But once I spoke with you and with her about, details about your program, I really felt comfortable that it's not the same kind of, bait and switch, the same kind of, bringing people into really high cost programs. So I really liked, especially having been to one of the schools who does a design program, I really liked the options with yours, how you can choose, a prep program or the 1 or 2 year intensive. The scheduling is great for people who are either working full time and only have nights and weekends available, or who want to do a full-time program. And everything's very upfront with the informationals. They get all of the information, before they ever sign anything, pay any deposit. So that made me more comfortable. I feel like, I'm able to talk to people realistically about it. It's a program that is affordable, especially compared to others. And one thing that makes it easier to market is that you're kind of going straight into the fashion program. Because with some of these 4-year schools, you're talking $200,000. And if you know 100% that you want to do fashion design, then you might not need 2 years of math, English, social studies, things like that.
Right.
So this really gives them a way to get into what they know they want to do without spending, $100,000 on classes that really aren't going to get them where they need to be.
Right.
So I can identify with that, having seen so many people pay so much for things that they didn't end up really using. It just seems logical to have something that's catered more directly to them, that's more transparent. They know what they're getting, and I felt like that was a mission I could support. So
yeah, so there were synergies between our business, and that was one of the things that made me excited to work with you as well, knowing that you have that deep-seated empathy and passion about really helping people. Because that was those are some of the reasons that we started Le Fashion Lab. I went through a college program and saw behind the scenes how students were treated, even very talented students, and how they were not given the assistance that they really needed to thrive. And even beyond the years of college, knowing that people didn't get hired the way that they had really anticipated being hired, and now you're stuck with $180,000 debt and no way to pay it back. So imagine if you had used that $180,000 to either finance your own business or to buy a home or something, not just be stuck with that debt that really wasn't beneficial to you in the first place. And not only the debt, I saw people taking out more student loan, more financial aid than they needed, because at the time it felt comfortable to be able to use it to pay their rent and to pay car notes and pay for classes, all of these things. And then when it comes time for you to pay it back, it didn't seem like such a wise idea after all, So you have
it's a huge problem, especially when you're looking at, the group that's around 18 years old. You can say you have to pay this back, but if you don't really highlight, this is how much it's going to be for this many years, it's really hard to fathom at that age, especially. And it's easy to say, well, I want a little extra to make my life more comfortable. I'd like to go shopping. I mean, I had people take out $6,000 in extra loans to go shopping on the nice shopping street in Charleston. It was, it's just like that $6,000 is going to be tacked onto the loans. It's just something that not only do the students not realize, but I don't feel like the schools do a great job of spelling it out, because it doesn't really matter to them. As long as they get paid, it doesn't really matter what happens down the line. And to me, it matters a whole lot for the student, and it also reflects on the school in the end if we're the ones who've pushed them into this huge level of debt that they really couldn't afford.
Right. It's almost like students need to see very clearly, like, this is the loan you're taking out. When you're done, this is what your monthly payment is looking like, potentially, to pay it back per month. This is the likelihood of the job that you could potentially get. Maybe 3 different scenarios. 1, you might be unemployed for a while you apply for jobs. 2, maybe you'll get a mediocre job, not quite what you were looking for. So how much can you pay back in that scenario? Or maybe you'll get something that you really were aspiring towards. And even so, can that entry-level salary pay back this massive loan that you've taken out? So I just think there needs to be more clarity, more empathy. But at the end of the day, like we've spoken about before, oftentimes these traditional colleges are not run like with the intention of really educating, but they're run more like corporations where the bottom line is the most important thing.
Right.
So
definitely, I would agree. And the other thing is, when they're coming in their first year, even if they did that calculation on what they might owe, they're not thinking, okay, let me add the next 3 years in that amount. And let's think of a scenario where maybe I lose my aid for some reason or don't qualify for the same thing. very few students, and even the families, honestly, the parents, very few are thinking, okay, if I have to borrow this much this year, and that's kind of my best case scenario, then let's add that up for 3 more years and then tack on the interest for 3 more years, and then the interest that's accruing the whole time. So there's not a real holistic way that people are looking at it. And the schools, although they have like a once a year requirement to do a small financial literacy thing, usually they don't even focus on the student loans often. It's like credit cards and things. So there's really not a push from the school side unless you happen to have a financial aid counselor who's concerned about it. And like I said, that's hit or miss. That's the problem, is that you may walk into somebody's office and they're really concerned and spend a lot of time, or you may just walk into somebody's office who's just ready to get on to the next student. So there needs to be a more comprehensive education, I think.
Right, right. And how do you, with your financial aid consulting business, how do you help? What are some of the services that you offer?
Well, I do seminars at local places. So I have like the DeKalb County Library System, some local schools, churches, the 100 Black Men of Atlanta group. So I do seminars where I go through all the basics of, how to apply for aid, what types of things you could run into during the application process that you need to resolve. Even things like, make sure you're checking your school email because stuff's going to be sent there rather than somewhere else, so you don't miss deadlines. Then also some education just about how to walk into the, the school, because everybody wants it to be aspirational and that's the way they're going to make it sound. But in my experience, if you have a little bit more of a lens to look at it and say, this is somebody trying to sell me something, almost like if you were buying a used car.
Mhm.
Sometimes just getting them in the right frame of mind to say, how do I ask for more money if I need it? Dealing with certain changes in circumstances. There's so many little tidbits. And then also just the requirements to retain your financial aid. A lot of the schools kind of hide that in a document that's 10 pages long, and so people don't realize, oh, if my GPA drops, it's not just a scholarship I'll lose, it's federal aid. So there's just so many bits and pieces. So I'm trying to, in my seminars, put together those pieces, kind of assemble them in a way that's helpful kind of to a large group. And then I do private consulting. So it's basically whatever anyone, they might need help with searching for extra scholarships. They might need help drafting appeal letters, filling out their FAFSA, letting us know about changing circumstances. So anything that I'm able to do that I've, done before in my own, at the school level, I can always help students and parents with.
Okay. You mentioned
sometimes
something.
It's just holding their hand through the process. It's really, as little or as much as they need. So some people feel pretty confident and only need one little thing, and some people want somebody the whole time to go through step by step.
So it's very hands-on. So there are 2 things I wanted to mention. So I want to go back to what you're saying to make sure everybody heard what you were saying. You need to treat the college application process like a used car dealership. Remember that you need to find out what this school has to offer you. A lot of times when we're applying to colleges, we get worried and stressed out because we're worried about what we have to offer them and whether or not they're going to accept us. But we need to really think about what they have to offer us. And especially when you're going into something like a design major that can be very razzle-dazzle, make sure that you're not being razzle-dazzled by the glitz and glamour. And then when you get into it, it's a completely different situation. You need to really get really straight about the dollars and cents of it. Okay, so I'm investing this amount into my education, and what is the anticipated return on my investment? Instead of, oh my gosh, this is so exciting, this celebrity is going to come, I'm going to meet this person and take some pictures with them, One of the things that I like to mention when I talk to people about my experience going to design school is how much time students used to invest in preparing for the final fashion show. And it was a process where you would present what you want, your designs, and you might be selected, you might not. And people would invest so much time and energy, blood, sweat, and tears into getting into this fashion show. While at the end of it, that's like a guarantee of nothing. So you get into the fashion show, and at the end of the fashion show, you've graduated and you have no job. So you're making no money at all, and you still have these loans or this debt to pay back. So that's something that could potentially make the school look great, because they have all of these wonderful photos to share, marketing, all of these celebrities come out, and they're using you for your talent, and because they got caught up in the razzle dazzle. But how about you spend that time instead trying to secure a job? That's what I did, and it worked out in my best interest, because I had a job before, not just a job, but like a career before graduating from school. So we really need to think smart and not get caught up in razzle dazzle, especially when you're in like a design focused type of major where it can look so glamorous on the outside. The other thing that you've spoken about before, you've spoken about the fact that there are sometimes like free money out there, grants and scholarships that they colleges sometimes hide.
Yes, well, a lot of times what happens is, well, when they package financial aid, they have to over award to begin with, knowing that not every freshman is going to come. So they do have to do some balancing with their budget, knowing that not all that aid is going to be spent. However, there's not really, first of all, most schools don't really have a process to redistribute any extra aid at the end of that. For them, if these people don't come, then we're going to wipe that clear and nobody else is going to get it. But also there's so many situations, and especially with the COVID times, there's special circumstances, and every school has a form for that, because the federal government, you have to accept an appeal and look it over if something has changed since the person filled out the FAFSA. During the beginning of COVID, every school was supposed to have that form posted on their website. And I don't think I've seen a single school that had that, because it doesn't benefit the school to say, oh, here, you can appeal and you could be eligible for more money, because that makes them not only spend more money, but it also makes them have to spend a lot of time, because it's the most time consuming process. So it's easier for them to just say, oh, well, sorry, make it work with a loan or something, rather than saying, well, you're actually kind of close to where you might be able to get a grant. Here's this form, and let us help you through it and see what else might be available. So it's one of those things that's hit or miss. You might get a counselor that says, oh, here, let me help you, and spends time with you. But I'd say that's pretty few and far between. And so it's really, there's no formalized process that every school is really grabbing onto like they should, to allow people to be reevaluated. So many people have lost jobs, or a family member, or had high medical bills. There's so many things that can change from when they filled out that form. So it's really important to let them know that, and let them know what their options are. But like I said, it's, when it's something that's money costing and time consuming, the schools are going to try to, hide that as much as possible, because it doesn't benefit them, to reevaluate everybody.
Right. So even though we might not think we need the help getting financial aid, because it's a process where I guess you can just click some buttons and you will get some kind of financial aid, but are you getting the best aid out there? And that's why you need somebody like you to really help them get the best that there is out there.
Right. And turn them away from some of the other things, not push them into these larger, at least somebody who will look at it holistically and see, is there anything else the student could get? Is there anything in their situation they could appeal for, before we just say, take on a large loan? And that's one of those things that just kind of gets missed, because it's much easier to just say, here, look for a lender, and that's it. Or even things like, I would always tell people which type of loan to accept if they were offered multiple ones. Just knowing which one accrues interest and which one doesn't makes a difference. Because if they don't need all that loan, some people would reject the one that had no interest, and nobody would catch it. And really, you're supposed to always take the one with no interest first and reject the other one. But like I said, there's people, that should be catching that stuff in the office that aren't. And so, somebody could have an extra few $1,000s tacked onto their loan by the end of it, just because of that one error in clicking, and nobody caught it or walked them through it.
Right. And this is kind of a guesstimate, but I want to ask you, how much money do you think you could save a potential client, maybe from low end to the high end?
It really depends. Usually it's at least a few $1,000s. because generally there's some opportunity for an appeal, or either there have been people who initially didn't qualify for one reason or another, and I was able to help them correct their application. And I've had it go all the way up to $60,000, where somebody didn't know how to do the process at all, said we're probably not going to get in. And then once I spoke with them, not only did I help them fill out the FAFSA, but then in the process, I found out the student had an IEP from having a disability. So, I, with my knowledge of financial aid, I had them reach out to vocational rehab, and they actually gave them a $60,000 award for 4 years on top of their other aid. So this student went from thinking they couldn't go to school at all to getting about $6,000 back in refunds each semester for housing and meals and everything.
Wow. So you saved that person about 60,000, you said?
Right.
Okay. Wow. So it can go from
we got the 60,000 on top of the regular financial aid, and then I'm not sure if he would have gotten the other financial aid because they hadn't done anything yet, but yeah, they kind of seemed like they were scared to, and so they had me just handle it all. And so that was about $12,000 more in aid in addition to the 60 for 1 year. So
it must be really fulfilling for you to be able to do what you do right now.
It is. And some of the most fulfilling ones, some of them, it's not even an increase in aid, but it's whether they can get aid at all or not. One that I've been working with very recently, one of the hardest situations is the kids who are at risk of homelessness. There's a really big thing, and sadly, it's pretty rampant with parents of students in the LGBT community, where they're kind of disowned when they come out. And so I've had probably 50 plus students that were disowned, had nowhere to live. They were couch surfing on, friends or neighbors or family members' couches, not sure they would ever be able to attend school because they might be homeless. And so helping those people through those appeals is really gratifying, because, this one person was applying to Harvard and Stanford. I mean, all these really great schools that she got into. And it was just, a situation of abuse and abandonment would have made her not get any aid. But if you have somebody that knows how to navigate the process, you can fill out the right forms, turn in the right documentation to get that overturned. So instead of getting no aid, because you're supposed to be a dependent student under 24, however, you don't have anybody to be dependent on, it really takes somebody to kind of help them through that process, because it's not something that's out there, really anywhere publicly. You just have to kind of know how to navigate it. So there's a whole subset of students who are, potentially almost homeless that end up getting enough aid to actually not only stay in school, but cover some room and board and things like that, which is really important.
Got it. Okay. So let's say somebody listens to this and they're really interested in contacting you to see how you can help them. How would they contact you?
They can go to my website. It's financialaidconsulting.net. Or my email is laurenrutledge@financialaidconsulting.net. And my phone number is 678-699-5872. So I can respond to any of those. And, some of the people are from Georgia, some are from out of state. If there's ever anything I can't answer, I'll always either research it or tell someone that, obviously. I don't try to get into academic advising or, things that aren't totally in my wheelhouse. However, I do have some people that I can refer people to that do those sorts of things. So the idea is to kind of create a community to get these students as much help as possible, so that they and their parents know what they're walking into and can make the best decision. One thing I even do is just, if they've accepted offer, or let's say they've gotten financial aid offers from 6 schools, I can look and do a net calculation, because they think, oh, this school gave us the most money, but that one might also have the highest bill. So I do analysis for all their schools and say, okay, here's the actual bottom line we're looking at. Here's how much loan debt you would be getting at this school. Sometimes that changes people's minds, because they realize, oh, even though I thought I was getting great scholarships, I'm going to pay $60,000 more in loans for this one school. And it's not really spelled out like that on their award letters per se. So people just a lot of times need an extra analysis, an extra set of eyes to really see what they're getting.
Okay, so you give some of that holistic calculation that you mentioned before is oftentimes missing. Okay, got it.
Yes, because people just don't know. There's nowhere else they can really compare it. And each school now has to have a net price calculator on their website. So I have people, when I give my seminars, I tell people you can fill out a kind of a dummy FAFSA that's not submitted to the government, but it'll tell you your information. And then you can go to each school and type in your information and see how much they might give you. Every school has to have that, but again, schools aren't pushing that out there because maybe their price doesn't look so low once it kind of doesn't jive with the admission stuff of, hey, we're going to give you so much money.
Right.
So it's important for somebody to be letting people know, hey, you actually have ways to look at this, more holistically as a family and figure out. And a big part of it is have a conversation with your students early. One big problem that I saw is parents really wanting to give their kids what they want, go to the best school that they want to go to, and not really a whole lot of conversation about what is economically viable for us as a family. So I get somebody in my office saying, well, we'll just take on this loan that's bigger than the amount it says, we make a year on the FAFSA, and next year maybe we'll win the lottery. And that's just not a good way to plan. I literally for that much time, but like you've got to have a conversation, even though it's not easy to talk to your kids about money, especially if you feel like you're at a lower income level. If that student does not understand that I've applied to a $60,000 a year school, but my parents are making $30,000 a year. If you don't have an earlier conversation, it's easy to get sucked in by all the glitz and glamour, like you said. And some of the glitziest are often the ones that are kind of hiding the most stuff. So yeah, it's just a case where it's very easy to get sucked in by a hard sales pitch when you haven't had a realistic conversation. And so that's one thing I really encourage is, whoever is helping you, whether it's a parent, grandparents, whoever, you've got to have some realistic idea of what you can afford. And sometimes it may be, okay, we can pay $10,000 out of pocket. That means if you get enough scholarships and grants to cover the rest, fine. If not, we need to eliminate that one.
Yeah,
and
that's a good.
Something I don't see that happens a lot, and it just,
That's a good point. And, I'm thinking maybe it has something to do with guilt when you're at that lower income level and you have this child who has done well enough now to be accepted into college, maybe oftentimes one of the first, if not the first, to be going to college in the family. And you feel bad that the child has made it this far and you can't help them. So you're like, whatever it takes, even if we have to sell our soul for you to go here, let's just sell our soul for you to be able to get into this school. But we really need to talk more practically, more dollars and cents. And sometimes, like we say, they can come to somebody like you. There might be some money that's hidden out there because colleges are not the most upfront when it comes to letting you know exactly what options are available to you. And sometimes it's about waiting. I mean, I have a best friend. My best friend, her sister eventually went to Columbia to do her MBA, and she's gone to like Ivy League schools. But it didn't happen immediately for her. Outside of high school, she had to wait for like 2 years until she got her like SAT score where she needed to get it, and until she got the financial aid package that made sense for her and her family. So sometimes you just have to have more of a delayed sense of gratification so you can make the best decision for you. And kind of off topic, but something I'm passionate about as well, is just looking into the options for vocational training. So even for that 1 or 2 years when maybe this college that you really want to go to is not the right fit for you, consider taking a break, possibly going to pursue a vocational avenue. That will always work in your favor, because once you have a skill, nobody can really take that away from you. You know what I mean? So that's just like a segue into something that another topic that I'm passionate about, people building the skills to be able to build the life they need, and just thinking, having more of a delayed sense of gratification, which I think when you're further down on the income level, that's a little bit more difficult to get, because there's this sense of guilt.
Right, definitely. And another thing that people will suggest, we'll go to a 2-year college and then transfer into your dream school. People also need to know, I don't feel like the schools are necessarily that transparent about how maybe a freshman might get this certain aid package, but that's not available for a transfer student. So you'll have somebody leave, go to another school for 2 years and come back, try to transfer in thinking they're going to get that initial aid package they were offered. And that's never going to be the case. So there's just so many ins and outs that it's just good to run it by somebody who knows how it works, because, same thing with somebody who appealed one time that I was helping. as far as the transparency issue. She was asking, they'd given her no money for a $60,000 cost of attendance, and they she had appealed and they denied her. And so I looked, and she had a huge gap in what she could contribute and what the total was. So it was a state school. So I looked up to see how much the state's actually paying them per student, because people don't realize that at a state school, they're getting paid per body, per head that comes into the school. That means if this girl had not shown up, the state would have not paid that school $6,000. So once we found that out and they were giving her zero, we put that in the appeal letter, because half of the appeal is really what angle do you have that's going to work the best. And so once we figured out, they didn't know that we found out that they were actually going to lose money if they lost the student. They didn't want us to know that, because that would give us leverage. So once I found that out, we drafted a new letter with that information, and then they ended up giving her, I think, $5,000 a year just because of that, just to keep her. But they wouldn't have done that if we hadn't looked up, how much the state pays. And so that's stuff that they're not going to put out there, because it doesn't benefit them to say, well, it hurts us to lose you just like it would hurt you to lose us. It's like you said, it's always a you need us thing, when really the student needs to look at themselves as an asset too, and they're needed by the school. So if you can kind of flip that script in your mind, it gives you a lot more leverage, and you can get a lot further in the process, and appeal and things like that, where a lot of people just think, oh, if I ask for something, they're not going to want me anymore. And that's not the case. So
right. Oh my gosh, Lauren, it's just like, just listening to you makes me realize that it's so essential to seek expert guidance. We know that that makes sense in a lot of different aspects of life. But think about financial aid. Like, there's hardly anything that's more important than your financial well-being. So if you're going to take this step, this financial aid step, as you're exploring your college options, you need expert guidance. And you need it to be a third-party person, because the financial aid counselor at the college might not be in your best interest at all. I mean, you might be fortunate enough to come across somebody like Lauren that is trying to look out for people, but just remember that these financial aid counselors and representatives are tied to these institutions. Oftentimes they have to sign non-disclosure agreements and that kind of thing, so they can't necessarily be working in your best interest. So seek somebody like Lauren, who is a third-party representative. She's not affiliated with any of these colleges, and she's looking out for your best interest. So I just I thought it was important, guys, for us to talk with Lauren. She's very knowledgeable about this topic, and she's very passionate about this topic. And I too am very passionate about this topic. And I must be honest, a part of the reason I'm passionate about this topic is because I want you to learn from my own mistakes and from the mistakes of a lot of my other classmates and friends. So the more we can get this information out there, the more that we can help people to make wise decisions with regards to their financial future.
Right. And it's especially, I had kind of the same thing with, starting a master's, that I ended up deciding to go this route instead. But it is, I've been in this place where you need the funds. And if those funds are there, well, I'll just take a little more to help cover, whatever I need to cover. But they're looming out there in the distance now. And so it's just one of those things. Even somebody who knows about it can get caught in a situation where they really feel like they need something, but that loan with that interest rate might not be your best option. So it's just really important to educate people as much as possible and have somebody to kind of bounce things off of that is in a more neutral position, I guess.
Yes.
Isn't really needing something right away, because when you're in a desperate situation, especially, it's harder to not just take this money that's approved for you. But you have to have a plan going forward, and like you said, make a kind of a chart of how much, what are my possible what's my possible income range, what's going to happen if I'm not able to pay these all back in time, what are my options. There's just so many things, because you don't want it to ruin your credit and take away other opportunities in the future. So
right. So guys, just a reminder that this is Lauren, and her company is called Financial Aid Consulting Limited. and she is here for you. If you're about to take that step towards college and you need help navigating the financial aid landscape, definitely advise you to contact her, and definitely advise you guys to use your brain to think about the decision that is the best for you. And if something that you want for yourself is not immediately feasible, don't be afraid to just take a step back and know that you can aspire for that a little bit later. Not everything has to be instant gratification. So again, this is Lauren, Financial Aid Consulting Limited, and we hope that you reach out to her for assistance and guidance as you navigate this next step in your life. And also, if you are passionate about fashion design and this is something that you've always wanted to pursue, then we'd be happy for you to take a look at our website as well and to reach out to Le Fashion Lab to find out if we are a good fit for you as you make that next step. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Thank you.